On my 6th year of serving in a war zone, my request to return to headquarters was denied again. The reason was simple. Hospital policy didn't allow close family members to work in the same department. Since Natalie, Hart and I were married, my return would be considered a conflict of interest. I refused to accept that. So, I quietly snuck back to Hartwell to demand an explanation. However, I heard a conversation that made me stop short right outside the administration office. "You've blocked Liam Hayes' transfer for 5 years all because of Noah Bennett," the department director snapped. "Liam ages out next year. This is his last chance to return." Natalie's face remained unreadable. "There's only one transfer slot this year. Noah gets it. Liam can go home and be a stay-at-home husband if he has to. Noah is different. He has ambition." The director slammed a hand on the desk. "And Liam doesn't? His dream was always to work at headquarters." His voice sharpened. "You were the one who had him sent to a war zone in the first place. Now you're blocking his only chance to come back. Noah barely passed his evaluations. He would have been removed years ago if you hadn't kept him under your wing. Do you honestly think you can protect him forever?" For the first time, anger flashed across Natalie's face. "Liam went there as my husband. How much could he have suffered?" Her tone grew icy. "Noah has no connections. If he were sent out there, it would ruin him. I'll take responsibility for Noah's training. I won't let anyone harm him." Outside the door, my eyes burned. I pulled out my phone and called my lawyer. "Draft the divorce papers. As fast as possible." I wasted 5 years all for a woman who had stopped loving me long ago. I no longer wanted to waste any more time on her. I no longer wanted to love her anymore. The moment I pushed the door open, every voice in the room went silent. Natalie froze, then her expression darkened as she looked me over. "Who told you to come here?" Her voice was sharp. "The field hospital is short-staffed. Leaving without approval is desertion." Then, she noticed my reddened eyes. Her gaze shifted away, and her voice lost a little of its sharpness. "What did you hear?" Natalie had always been strict about work, even to the point of cruelty. She made no exceptions, even for her own husband. I still remember when I was first transferred to the war zone 5 years ago. I had nearly died more than once under gunfire and explosions. All I wanted was to see her. After getting through all the hoops, I eventually took an illegal border van back to Hartwell and walked until my shoes were ruined, just to speak to her face to face. I thought she would be happy to see me. Instead, Natalie shoved me away the second she saw me. She had berated me. It was as if she couldn't see my exhausted, filthy state. "Liam, do you have no respect for discipline? If you come back without authorization again, I won't go easy on you just because we're married." I wouldn't have believed that she had blocked my transfer for Noah's sake for 5 whole years if I hadn't overheard this conversation. I wouldn't have believed it for a second that she intended to bring him back and mentor him herself. I placed 2 sets of documents on the desk. When I spoke, I sounded calmer than I expected. "This is my application to return to headquarters." I looked at her. It's been 5 years. With my qualifications, I should be back by now. Natalie rubbed her temples, exhaustion written across her face. "Stop being impulsive, Liam. The transfer rules are clear. Headquarters can't have direct family members in the same department." Her tone sharpened once more. "This decision came from above. Stop making things difficult for me. Husband and wife, that was what we were supposed to be." She stood there, elegant and untouchable. A department chief whose every word could move hundreds of people. Even the pen on her desk cost more than I made in months. And me? I had gone willingly to a war zone because she begged me to help her. I slogged through sand, mud, blood, and smoke for 5 whole years. My hands bore frostbite scars. My clothes were threadbare and thin, having been washed countless times. The colors had even faded to a pale hue. I couldn't grasp which aspect of myself made her life so hard. "I won't make things difficult for you." I pulled the second document from beneath the transfer application and placed it in front of her. "Let's get divorced." I met her eyes. "The policy can't change, but our relationship can." Natalie went still as she stared at me in disbelief. "Liam, what do you think our marriage is? When did you become this calculating? All this just to get what you want?" I clenched my fists so tightly my nails broke skin. I forced the tears back. "It's been 5 years. I'm about to age out of eligibility for a headquarters transfer." I stared down at her. "Natalie, I can't wait any longer." I couldn't wait for the cutoff to end, as it was my only chance to return. I also couldn't keep waiting for her to love me again. For once, I had to fight for myself. Natalie looked at me for a long moment, something unreadable flickering in her eyes. When she spoke again, her voice softened. "I know these last 5 years have been hard on you, but this year isn't possible. Liam, trust me. Just wait a little longer." She stepped behind me, wrapping her arms around me as though none of this had happened. Then, she reached up to wipe the tears from my face. I stepped away before she could touch me. A bitter laugh slipped from my lips as I stared right at her. "Why isn't it possible? Is it because you already assigned the spot to someone else? Or because of Noah? Whatever patience she had left disappeared. Her face hardened. So that's what this is really about. You're so desperate to come back because you think something is going on between Noah and me? She scoffed. Fine. Let's do it your way. You still won't be transferred back this year, even if we do get a divorce. Do you still want me to sign? I didn't hesitate. Yes. Her jaw clenched. She grabbed a pen and signed the papers with such force that it nearly tore through the documents before throwing the divorce agreement at me. Her voice was as brittle as ice. Don't come crying to me if no one else wants you after you fail to get back into headquarters. During the mandatory 30-day waiting period, I worked myself into the ground. I didn't take any breaks for 15 days straight. My hard work paid off, and I made the shortlist for the headquarters transfer. Everything was going as planned, except for one issue. My old arm injury flared up. The same one I sustained 3 years ago while saving Natalie. A surgery had gone wrong. I stepped in front of Natalie to take the attack for her, resulting in permanent nerve damage. My muscles now spasm constantly, and the war zone lacked the resources to treat them properly. Last year, I found out that a specialist was available to perform surgery. Meanwhile, Noah only got a minor cut on his hand. Natalie pulled the surgeon away to examine him instead. I lost my best chance at treatment. Now that I finally had a shot at coming home, I needed this surgery. Not long after I scheduled it, Natalie showed up at the hospital. She had access to my medical files, so finding out wasn't difficult. She glanced at my wrist and spoke coldly. Noah knows about your surgery. He's worked hard for this transfer. If your arm gets fixed, you'll be competing with him. I frowned. She crossed her arms and continued. Postpone the surgery. Once Noah is transferred back, I'll perform it myself. The pain in my arm suddenly intensified. A cold sensation rushed through me. The day I was stabbed while defending her, Natalie had sobbed so uncontrollably that she could hardly breathe. Why would you do something so stupid? If anyone should have been hurt, it should have been me. She had sobbed and clung to me like I was her everything. If anything happened to you, I'd die with you. And now, she was calmly taking away my chance to have a healthy body again, just because Noah needed the transfer. Whatever warmth I harbored for her in the past died in that moment. Something ugly twisted in my chest. For once, I didn't want her to get what she wanted. I looked at her coldly. This is my body. Only I have a say in this. My surgery has nothing to do with you. The air around her turned glacial. She grabbed my wrist so hard it felt like my bones might crack. Do you have any idea how devastated Noah will be if he doesn't get transferred back? I have plenty of ways to shut this surgery down. She forced me to look at her. My eyes burned with redness, and I laughed bitterly. All Noah has to do is just one tear, and you collapse. So tell me, is he truly your junior colleague or your lover? Rage exploded in her eyes. She lifted her hand. Natalie snapped. Liam, that's enough. A sharp gust swept past my face. I lifted my head and let the tears slide down my cheeks, waiting for the slap. However, the pain never came. Natalie's phone rang. It was Noah's special ringtone. Her eyes shimmered with tenderness that couldn't be concealed, and her voice grew softer. What happened? I told you to stay put. You don't need to cook. A faint, wounded sob came through the speaker. I guess Noah must have tried to cook for her and hurt himself. Natalie immediately began coaxing him in that soft, patient voice. Okay, don't worry. I'll postpone the surgery. Then she added gently, you're the only person I love. There won't be anyone else. Her voice was so tender. To me, it was unbearable. I turned away and curled under the blanket, letting my tears soak silently into the pillow. After Natalie hung up, she stayed quiet for a long time. Then, she reached over and tucked the blanket around me. Postpone it. When the time comes, I'll cover the surgery and recovery costs. I know this divorce is only happening because you're upset about not being transferred back. She paused before continuing. Liam, there's nothing between Noah and me. You can choose to believe me, or don't. It's your choice. I kept my eyes closed and said nothing. Only the pillow beneath me grew warmer and wetter. Eventually, her patience ran out. She stood, her tone becoming icy. Fine. Have the surgery. But if you do, you will never return to headquarters. Liam, this is my final compromise. The headquarters was at its busiest point of the year. I knew very well that surgery on my hand could affect my transfer eligibility. Still, I didn't hesitate. I scheduled the operation. When I came out, pain throbbed through my wrist in waves. Today was the day they would announce which doctors had been approved to return to headquarters. I had to be there. When I arrived, applause echoed through the main lobby. Congratulations, Dr. Bennett, on returning to headquarters to train under Chief Hart. Noah stood beneath the stage, giving a thank you speech. Natalie smiled at him, nodding again and again. They looked like a perfect couple as they stood there. My steps faltered. Then I forced my way into the crowd and asked loudly, wasn't the transfer list supposed to be finalized today? I submitted my application. Why was the list announced before I even got back? Noah smiled and pointed at the public notice board. Dr. Hayes, doctors who've recently had major surgery aren't eligible for this transfer. His smile widened. Chief Walsh reported your surgery personally, so I'm the only remaining candidate. The taste of blood filled my mouth. I swallowed hard, fighting back tears as I looked toward Natalie. Her gaze was flat. I told you to postpone the surgery, she said. You didn't listen. The pain in my wrist intensified. My stomach churned. It was as if a thorn was scraping every nerve in my body. I trembled all over as I asked. You told me to postpone it because you wanted me to stay behind? I laughed bitterly. No. You did it because of Noah. You screened the list early. You abused your position to get him transferred back. Natalie's eyes turned cold. Liam, this is a hospital. The transfer list has been finalized. Stop making a scene. Rage surged through my chest. I had given everything just for this chance. So why was he the one who got to come back? I refused to accept it. I rushed onto the stage, opened my phone, and sent the documents I had gathered to the hospital group chat. Then I spoke, each word raw with pain. Noah was assigned to the war zone unit for 2 years, but he repeatedly abandoned his post and returned to Hartwell without approval. He has no respect for hospital discipline. During his internship at headquarters, he received more than a dozen patient complaints. A year ago, a surgical mistake under his supervision resulted in a patient's death. I glanced at Natalie. And you covered it all up for him. He was never qualified to come back to headquarters. The silence in the main auditorium didn't just fall, it crushed the air right out of the room. On the 2 massive LED screens flanking the stage, screens that moments before displayed Noah Bennett's smiling face above the bold gold lettering Welcome to Headquarters. A set of high-resolution PDF documents appeared. They were time-stamped, certified field logs bearing the official seal of the 4th Forward Surgical Unit in the Northern Combat Zone. Below them was an autopsy report from 16 months ago. The name on the file read, Patient number 4092, Corporal Aaron Miller. Cause of death: uncontrolled intra-abdominal hemorrhage due to improper vascular clamping during emergency laparotomy. Lead assistant, Dr. Noah Bennett. Supervising official, Dr. Natalie Hart. The PDF scrolled automatically on the screen, showing a signed waiver where Natalie had overridden the field coroner's review, classifying the death as insurmountable battle trauma, and clearing Noah of all technical fault before having the body cremated within 24 hours. A collective, sharp intake of breath rippled through the 300 doctors, board members, and regional health administrators sitting in the plush velvet seats. Noah's face drained of every drop of color. His hand, still clutching the microphone, began to tremble so violently that the metallic grill rattled against his teeth. This is a fake," Noah stammered, his voice amplified across the surround sound speakers, high-pitched and frantic. "Chief Hart, he's framing me. Dr. Hayes hacked the department server. He's bitter because his transfer wasn't approved." Natalie's reaction was instant. Her administrative instinct, the cold, calculating reflex that had kept her at the top of Hartwell's hierarchy for a decade, kicked in. She didn't look at the screen. She didn't look at Noah. She stepped directly in front of the podium, her eyes locking onto mine like 2 ice picks. "Turn off the projector," Natalie commanded, her voice dropping an octave, carrying the terrifying authority of a department head. "Security, escort Dr. Hayes out of the auditorium immediately. He is suffering from acute post-traumatic stress and physical exhaustion following unauthorized medical leave." 2 armed hospital security officers stepped forward from the side aisles. "Don't touch him," a heavy, gravelly voice barked from the VIP box on the 2nd floor. The room froze. An old man with silver hair, wearing a dark navy blazer pinned with a small gold military star, stood up from his seat. It was Director Vance, the former chief of surgery at Hartwell and the current chairman of the Regional Medical Disciplinary Board. He had retired from active surgery 5 years ago, but his words still carried the weight of law across every hospital in the province. Director Vance didn't look at Natalie. He adjusted his glasses, staring fixedly at the projection screen. "Nobody turns off that screen," Director Vance said, his voice quiet, calm, and terrifyingly clear. "And nobody touches Dr. Hayes." "Director Vance," Natalie spoke quickly, her hands flattening against the podium, her knuckles turning white. "This is an internal department matter. Liam is my husband. He has been under severe psychological strain in the field, and his arm surgery was performed only hours ago. He is not in a rational state." "Is that your signature on page 4 of the coroner's override, Chief Hart?" Director Vance interrupted, cutting her off with a single sentence. Natalie's jaw tightened. The field conditions during the Northern Offensive were chaotic. Standard administrative reviews were streamlined under emergency military protocols. "Page 4. Director Vance repeated, stepping down the stairs from the VIP box. His cane clicking heavily against the marble steps. Is that your signature? Natalie went rigid. Yes. But as the attending authority on site. And did Dr. Bennett perform an unsupervised arterial repair on Corporal Miller, despite failing his vascular rotation twice during his internship at Hartwell? Silence. Natalie's mouth pressed into a thin, pale line. She glanced at Noah out of the corner of her eye. Noah looked as though he were about to vomit. He shrank back, behind the podium, trying to hide behind Natalie's shadow, just as he had done for the past 5 years. I stood on the edge of the stage, my left arm bound in a heavy white surgical sling, the fresh incisions beneath the bandages throbbing with a dull, sickening ache. I looked at the two of them. For 5 years, I had believed that Natalie's coldness toward me was simply her nature. I had convinced myself that she was a woman carved from ice, a surgeon who viewed emotion as a weakness, a leader who put the rules above all else. I had accepted her coldness as her form of love. When she sent me to the front lines, I told myself she trusted my skill. When she refused my calls, I told myself she was too busy saving lives. When she scolded me for coming back to see her, I told myself she was protecting hospital discipline. Now, looking at the way her body instinctively tilted forward to physically block Director Vance's view of Noah, the truth hit me with the force of a physical blow. She wasn't incapable of warmth. She wasn't an unfeeling machine. She had just given all her warmth, all her protection, and all her leniency to someone else. I didn't hack any server, I said, my voice echoing through the quiet hall. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Those files were sent to me 3 days ago by the 4th Unit's chief logistics officer. They were archived under emergency field records because the corporal's family filed a formal inquiry with the military bureau last month. I pulled a small, silver flash drive from my pocket with my good hand and held it up. The original surgical telemetry logs, the audio recordings from the operating room, and the signed transfer overrides are all here, I said, looking directly at Director Vance. I brought them here today not to fight for a transfer. I paused, turning my head slowly to look at Natalie. I brought them here to ensure that the man who killed a soldier on my operating table never touches a scalpel again. The auditorium exploded into noise. Reporters from the Regional Medical Journal, who had been invited by Natalie's PR team to cover Noah's triumphant return, were already frantically typing on their laptops and holding up their phones to record the stage. Liam. Natalie took 2 fast steps toward me, her face pale, her eyes wide with a mix of fury and genuine panic. Have you lost your mind? Do you have any idea what you're doing to the department's reputation? To my reputation. She reached out, grabbing my right wrist, the uninjured arm, with a grip so tight. Her nails bit into my sleeve. Take it back, she whispered frantically, her voice trembling with a rage I had never heard from her before. Tell them it was an unverified draft. Tell them you made a mistake in the field data. Liam, I am warning you, if you ruin Noah, today you ruin me. I stood there, looking down at her hand on my arm. 3 years ago, when a rogue fragment of shrapnel ripped through the canvas of our field tent during a mortar shelling, I didn't think twice. I threw my body over hers. The steel tore through the muscle and nerve bundle in my right forearm, severing the radial innervation. When I woke up in the field clinic, bleeding through my bandages, she had held my face and cried, swearing she would spend the rest of her life making it up to me. Now her hand was gripping that same arm, not to ask if my fresh surgical wounds hurt, but to force me to lie for the man who had stolen my life. I gently, deliberately peeled her fingers off my wrist, one by one. You ruined yourself, Natalie, I said softly. Before she could speak, the heavy double doors at the back of the auditorium were pushed open with a loud slam. 4 men in deep green military uniforms walked into the hall. Their boots clicked with rhythmic, iron precision against the floor. At the head of the group was a tall man in his 50s with broad shoulders, 3 silver stars pinned to his collar, and a face lined by decades of command. General Marcus Miller, Chief of Logistics and Medical Command for the Northern War Zone, and the father of Corporal Aaron Miller. The room went dead silent again. Even Director Vance bowed his head slightly in respect as the general walked down the center aisle. Natalie's breathing hitched. Her hand dropped to her side. General Miller didn't look at the crowd. He walked straight up the steps of the stage, his heavy gaze sweeping over Noah, who was now visibly shaking before coming to a stop on me. The general lifted his arm and delivered a crisp, formal military salute to me. Dr. Hayes, General Miller said, his voice like grinding stones. The Defense Bureau has received your final field clearance report. On behalf of the 4th Forward Surgical Unit, I thank you for 6 years of selfless service under fire. Sir, I replied, returning a simple head nod, my sling preventing me from Saluting properly. General Miller turned toward Natalie. The temperature on the stage dropped below. Freezing. Chief Hart, the general said quietly. 6 months ago, my office received a formal request from the field hospital for Dr. Hayes's immediate rotation back to headquarters. His 6-year combat duty tour was completed 12 months ago. The board approved his release twice. Natalie's lips moved, but no sound came out. Each time, General Miller continued, pulling a folder from beneath his arm, our office received an administrative block signed by you, stating that Dr. Hayes was indispensable to forward operations and had personally requested an extension of his combat deployment. The general opened the folder and held up a letter. Did Dr. Hayes sign these extensions, Chief Hart? Natalie's face was as white as a sheet. She swallowed hard, her confidence entirely shattered. The field unit was severely understaffed, General. As his departmental superior, I made an executive assessment regarding personnel allocation. You forged his signature, General Miller said flatly. A gasp echoed across the auditorium. You forged your husband's signature on military deployment extensions to keep him trapped in an active shelling zone for 2 extra years, General Miller said, his eyes burning with cold fury. Also, his senior surgical slot at Hartwell would remain vacant, waiting for you to hand it to this coward. The general turned his head and glared at Noah. Noah couldn't take it anymore. His knees gave out, and he collapsed back onto the carpeted floor behind the podium, letting out a stifled, pathetic sob. General, please. Natalie took a step forward, her voice desperate. It was an administrative oversight. The hospital needed stability. My son died on your operating table because you put a pen in the hand of an incompetent child and called him a surgeon, General Miller said, stepping closer to her, his voice dropping into a dangerous whisper. And then you buried the report to protect your own career. General Miller turned to the officers behind him. Seize all records pertaining to the 4th Unit's administrative transfers. Notify the military prosecutor's office. Dr. Natalie Hart and Dr. Noah Bennett are under immediate federal investigation. The news hit the medical world like an earthquake. Within 24 hours, the story of Chief Natalie Hart forging military deployment papers to keep her husband in a war zone while covering up a fatal surgical error for her favorite junior doctor dominated every major news network in the country. Hartwell Hospital's board of directors held an emergency midnight meeting. By sunrise, Natalie was officially suspended from all clinical and administrative duties pending a full joint investigation by the Ministry of Health and the military judiciary. Noah Bennett was stripped of his medical license temporarily, placed under home confinement, and faced potential criminal charges for manslaughter through gross negligence. I spent the next 2 weeks in a quiet private room on the 7th floor of the hospital's orthopedic recovery wing. The surgery on my arm, performed by Dr. Vance's former mentor, a brilliant neurovascular specialist brought in from the capital, had been a complete success. The damaged scar tissue around my radial nerve was cleared, and for the first time in 3 years, the violent muscle spasms in my fingers had stopped. I sat by the window every afternoon, doing my physical therapy exercises, squeezing a soft foam ball, watching the autumn leaves fall from the trees in the hospital courtyard. For the first time in 6 years, there were no mortar sirens, no smell of burning diesel and iron-rich blood, no endless line of screaming, mangled soldiers waiting for me to decide who lived and who died. It was quiet. On the 20th day of the 30-day divorce waiting period, my room door opened. Natalie walked in. She didn't look like the untouchable, immaculate department chief anymore. She wore a simple dark trench coat over plain clothes. Her signature high ponytail was gone, her hair falling loosely around her shoulders. She had deep, dark circles beneath her eyes, and her face was thin, pale, and worn. She carried a small paper bag from a local bakery, the one near the university, where we had first met 8 years ago. She stopped at the foot of my bed, looking at me sitting in the sunlight. Liam, she said softly. Her voice sounded fragile, stripped of all its former frost. I didn't stop squeezing the foam ball. I looked up at her, my expression completely flat. You shouldn't be here. The investigation rules state you aren't supposed to contact witnesses. Natalie took a shaky breath, setting the paper bag down on the bedside table. I came as your wife, not as a doctor. A faint, bitter smile touched my lips. We have 10 days left until the divorce is finalized, Natalie. Don't waste your time. She bit her lip, her eyes brimming with sudden tears. She stepped closer, reaching out a hand as if she wanted to touch my shoulder, but stopped herself mid-air, her hand trembling in the empty space between us. I went back to our house yesterday, she whispered, her voice cracking. The quiet was unbearable. I opened your closet. Half of your clothes are still the old shirts you wore before you left for the field 6 years ago. You didn't buy anything new. You didn't spend a single cent of your field bonus. She looked at me, tears finally spilling over her lashes. I found the wooden box under our bed, Liam. The one with all the letters you wrote me from the war zone. The ones you never mailed. I remained silent, looking out the window. Those letters. During my first 2 years in the northern zone, whenever the shelling got too intense, whenever I was so exhausted after an 18-hour shift that my hands wouldn't stop shaking, I would sit in the dark corner of the bunker and write to her. I wrote about how much I missed her, how I dreamed of the day I could return to Hartwell, stand beside her in the operating theater, and come home to make dinner with her. I stopped writing them in the 3rd year. That was the year I realized she never answered my emails, never asked the field command about my safety, and only called when she needed me to complete administrative reports under her name. I read them all, Natalie sobbed, stepping closer, dropping to her knees beside my hospital bed, clutching the edge of my mattress with both hands. Every single one. Liam. I was wrong. I was so blind. I thought you would always be there. I thought you were strong enough to take anything. So you gave everything I deserved to Noah? I asked, turning my head to look down at her. No, she cried frantically, looking up at me with red, swollen eyes. It wasn't like that. Noah reminded me of how I felt when I first entered residency. He was weak, he was scared, he made mistakes, and he relied on me for everything. It made me feel needed. She grabbed my hand, the injured hand that was now healing, and pressed her wet cheek against my knuckles. You were always so independent, Liam, she wept. You never complained. You never asked me for help. You took the shrapnel for me and didn't even yell. You were so strong that I forgot. I forgot that you were human. I forgot that you were hurting. I looked down at her crying on her knees by my bed. Years ago, if I had seen her cry like this, I would have burned the world down, just to comfort her. I would have given up my career, my health, my dignity, just to see her smile again. Now, as her tears soaked into the bandage on my wrist, I felt nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, just a vast, cold emptiness. Natalie, I said quietly, pulling my hand back out of her grip. Being strong wasn't my choice. I had to be strong because I had no one standing behind me. Her breath caught in her throat. When Noah cut a finger, you pulled a specialist off my surgery to treat him. I said, my voice steady and quiet. When I took a blade to the arm for you, you left me in a field tent and went back to headquarters to write his evaluation. I looked her in the eyes. You didn't neglect me because I was strong, Natalie. You neglected me because you knew I loved you enough to let you walk all over me. Natalie stayed on her knees for a long time, weeping silently, but I didn't reach out to comfort her again. Finally, seeing the complete, dead quiet in my eyes, she realized that no amount of tears could undo 5 years of betrayal. She slowly stood up, wiped her face with the back of her hand, and looked at me with a desperate, broken look. The disciplinary board is meeting tomorrow morning, she whispered, her voice hollow. They are going to revoke my medical license permanently, Liam. 10 years of work, gone. If you submit a statement saying that the deployment extensions were a mutual agreement between us, I might still be able to stay on as an associate researcher. She looked at me, her eyes pleading for a final lifeline. Just one statement. Liam, please, don't destroy everything I built. I looked at the paper bag of pastries she had brought, the ones from our university days, and then looked back at her. The board will make their decision based on the facts, Natalie, I said. I won't lie for you anymore. She froze. The last bit of hope in her eyes died out, replaced by a dull, hopeless despair. She turned around and walked out of the room, her shoulders hunched, her steps slow and heavy. 2 days later, the real catastrophe broke. Noah Bennett, terrified of going to prison for manslaughter, hired a defense lawyer. To save his own skin, Noah turned over a series of secret voice recordings he had taken over the past 2 years during his private meetings with Natalie. In one of the clearer recordings, which was leaked to the media by the victims' family, Natalie's voice was crisp and arrogant. Don't worry about the Miller boys' autopsy, Noah. I've already signed the override. The military won't look too closely at a field casualty. As long as Liam stays in the northern zone, his transfer slot remains open. I'll make sure you get it next year. Just make sure you pass your basic board evaluations so I have an excuse to bring you up. Noah's voice replied, sickly sweet and manipulative. Chief Hart, what if Dr. Hayes finds out? What if he comes back? Natalie's recorded response was icy and dismissive. Liam does whatever I tell him to do. He's been in the war zone so long he has nowhere else to go. Depends on me. The recording sent shockwaves through the entire country. The last shreds of sympathy Natalie had held among a few loyal colleagues vanished overnight. Noah's desperate attempt to throw Natalie under the bus to save himself backfired completely. The public saw him not just as an incompetent surgeon, but as a treacherous, parasitic coward who had recorded the very woman who destroyed her life to protect him. The next morning, the Ministry of Justice officially upgraded the charges against both of them. Noah Bennett was indicted on charges of gross medical negligence leading to death and evidence tampering. Natalie Hart was indicted for felony forgery of military documents, abuse of administrative power, and obstruction of justice in a fatal incident investigation. Her career wasn't just over. Her freedom was now on the line. While the storm raged around Natalie and Noah, my world began to rebuild itself from the ashes. On the 25th day of my recovery, Director Vance walked into my room, accompanied by a woman in a sharp gray suit carrying a thick leather briefcase. "Dr. Hayes," Director Vance said, a genuine, warm smile on his weathered face. "How is the arm feeling today?" "The nerve sensation is almost fully restored, Director," I replied, standing up from my chair. "I can form a tight fist now without any muscular lag." "Good. Very good." Director Vance nodded approvingly. He turned to the woman beside him. "This is Director Vance Lee from the National Ministry of Emergency Medical Services." The woman stepped forward and shook my hand firmly. "Dr. Hayes, we've spent the last 2 weeks reviewing your actual field record," she said, opening her briefcase and pulling out a set of official government documents bearing the gold crest of the National Trauma Bureau. "For 6 years, while your administrative file at Hartwell was suppressed, you performed over 1,400 high-complexity emergency trauma surgeries in the northern zone," she explained. "Your survival rate for severe thoracic and vascular combat injuries was 89%, the highest recorded across all 3 forward surgical teams." She placed the document in my hands. "The National Emergency Medical Center in the capital is establishing a new National Mobile Trauma Command," she said, her eyes filled with deep professional respect. "We need a chief of surgical operations. Someone who can lead under fire, someone who knows trauma medicine better than anyone in this country." I stared at the document. The title read, "Appointment of Chief Surgeon, National Trauma Command." "This appointment comes directly from the Ministry of Defense and the Ministry of Health," Director Vance added softly. "It is completely independent of Hartwell, independent of local hospital politics, and carries full administrative autonomy." He looked at me with a proud, fatherly expression. "You were meant for greatness, Liam. A diamond like you was never meant to be hidden in a dark corner by someone who was too blind to see your brilliance." My fingers brushed over the heavy embossed gold seal on the document. 6 years ago, all I wanted was to come back to Hartwell, to work in a small operating room beside the woman I loved, content to live in her shadow forever. I had fought through blood, fire, and ice for 6 years just to get a transfer back to a local hospital that didn't even want me. And now, when I finally stopped chasing her, the world opened its doors to me. "Thank you, Director," I said, my voice steady, my chest filling with a clean, light air I hadn't breathed in years. "I accept." The day arrived. The 30-day mandatory waiting period for the divorce was officially over. The morning sky over the city was clear and crisp, bright autumn sunlight washing over the steps of the Civil Affairs Bureau. I arrived at 9 o'clock sharply, wearing a clean, dark blue suit. My right arm was free from the sling now, the long, thin surgical scar along my forearm fading into a clean line, a mark of healing, not of pain. Natalie was already waiting inside the lobby. She was sitting on a plastic bench in the corner, staring at the floor. She wore a simple white shirt and dark trousers, looking thin and fragile. When she heard my footsteps, she jumped up, her eyes wide, fixed on me. She looked at my arm, seeing that I was no longer wearing the sling. "Liam," she whispered. "Let's get this done," I said calmly, walking toward the registration counter. She followed behind me like a ghost, her steps hesitant and trembling. We sat down in front of the registrar. The clerk looked at our paperwork, then looked up at us with a professional, neutral expression. "Dr. Liam Hayes and Dr. Natalie Hart," the clerk said, confirming the details. "You have completed the 30-day cooling-off period. Both parties have signed the property division agreement. Do you both still consent to the dissolution of this marriage?" "Yes," I said without a second of hesitation. The clerk looked at Natalie. "Mrs. Hart?" Natalie's hands were clamped together in her lap, her knuckles white. She looked at me, her eyes filled with an agonizing, desperate sorrow. "Liam," she sobbed softly, her voice barely audible. If I go to prison, will you ever come to see me?" I looked at her. I remembered the young medical student who used to sit beside me in the university library, sharing a cheap cup of coffee, promising that we would become great surgeons together. I remembered the bride who stood beneath the white arch 8 years ago, whispering that she would love me through better or worse. That girl was gone. She had been devoured by her own arrogance, her ambition, and her cold selfishness years ago. No, Natalie, I said quietly, my voice completely devoid of hatred or malice. I won't. Tears spilled over her eyes, falling continuously onto the divorce documents on the desk. Is there really nothing left between us? She whimpered, her voice breaking into tiny, pathetic pieces. Not even a little bit of memory. You used up the last of my love 5 years ago, Natalie, I told her softly. It just took me 5 years to realize it. The clerk sighed lightly, realizing there was no turning back. Stamp. Stamp. 2 bright red seals were pressed onto the divorce certificates. The clerk handed me my dark red booklet, the final legal proof that I was once again a free man. I took the booklet, stood up, and placed a small velvet box on the desk in front of Natalie. Inside was the silver wedding band I had worn through 6 years of war, the ring that had survived mud, blood, mortar blasts, and freezing winter nights on the front lines. Goodbye, Natalie, I said. I turned around and walked out of the building into the brilliant, warm autumn sunshine, without looking back even once. Behind me, inside the cold lobby, a long, agonizing scream of utter heartbreak broke through the quiet air, followed by the heavy, rhythmic sound of military police boots coming to take her away. 8 months later, a sudden 6.8 magnitude earthquake struck the mountainous region 60 miles north of the capital, triggering massive landslides that buried 3 towns and collapsed a major chemical processing facility. The National Emergency Medical Center mobilized immediately. At the epicenter of the relief zone, beneath a gray sky heavy with rain, a massive forward field hospital had been constructed out of heavy industrial tents within 4 hours of the disaster. Inside the main surgical tent, bright LED operating lights illuminated 3 surgical tables running simultaneously. The air smelled of iodine, cauterized tissue, and damp earth. Dr. Hayes. Patient 2 has a severe crush injury to the lower abdomen with a ruptured pelvic artery. Blood pressure is dropping fast, 60/40. A nurse yelled over the sound of rain pounding against the canvas roof. Prepare for an emergency resuscitative endovascular balloon occlusion. I ordered calmly, my voice steady, carrying absolute authority. I stood at the central table, wearing dark green surgical scrubs, my hands moving with terrifying, flawless precision. My right arm, the arm Natalie thought was ruined forever, was completely restored. My fingers held the arterial clamp with millimeter-perfect stability, stopping a massive internal bleed within 90 seconds. Bleeder controlled, I said crisply. Suction. Pass me the 3-0 proline suture. Beside me, 4 young surgical residents watched my movements with open-mouthed awe. In the 8 months since I took over the National Trauma Command, our unit had revolutionized emergency field response in the country. We were fast, we were fearless, and under my leadership, our survival rate was the stuff of legends. Outside the surgical tent, a group of volunteer medical aides were unloading supplies from an ambulance. Among the volunteers, wearing a muddy plastic poncho, carrying heavy boxes of saline solutions, was a woman with thin, hollow cheeks and red, raw hands from working in the cold mud. It was Natalie. Following her trial 6 months ago, Natalie had been convicted of forgery and abuse of power due to her lack of prior criminal record and Director Vance's quiet intervention on account of her past medical contributions. Her prison sentence had been suspended, but her medical license was permanently revoked. She was barred from ever entering an operating room as a doctor again. She had lost her title, her house, her reputation, and her career. Noah Bennett had been sentenced to 7 years in federal prison, leaving her entirely alone to face the consequences of her choices. Now stripped of everything, she worked as an unpaid civilian volunteer for the Red Cross, doing heavy manual labor at disaster sites just to earn enough for basic meals. She stood outside the open flap of the surgical tent, carrying a heavy crate of for bags, her feet ankle deep in freezing mud. Through the rain, she looked inside the illuminated tent. She saw me. I was standing beneath the surgical lights, surrounded by top-tier surgeons who looked at me with deep admiration, saving a life with hands that were calm, strong, and majestic. I was the brilliant surgeon she had once looked down upon. I was the husband she had thrown away like trash to protect an incompetent coward. Tears mixed with the cold rain streaming down her face. She stood in the mud, her body trembling from the freezing cold and the crushing, unbearable weight of regret that would haunt her for the rest of her life. Inside the tent, I completed the final suture on the patient's artery. Vitals stabilizing, the anesthesiologist announced with a relieved smile. BP. Back to 110/70. You saved him, Chief. Good work, everyone, I said, stepping back from the table, stripping off my bloody gloves. I turned my head toward the tent entrance to grab a clean towel. My eyes swept across the rainy courtyard, casually brushing past the figure of The woman standing in the mud holding a crate of supplies. My gaze didn't stop. There was no hatred in my eyes, no bitterness, no lingering pain. She was just a stranger standing in the rain. I turned back to my team, my voice warm and bright as I looked at the next patient being brought through the door. Next table, I said, pulling on a fresh pair of gloves. Let's get to work. 2 years later, the Capital Medical University's main auditorium was filled to capacity for the annual National Trauma Surgery Conference. I stood behind the central podium in a crisp dark suit, presenting our team's latest research on advanced field vascular repair, a breakthrough that had cut emergency casualty mortality by 40% nationwide over the past 2 years. When my presentation concluded, the entire hall, over 1,000 senior surgeons, international guests, and young medical students, rose to their feet, delivering a thunderous, standing ovation that lasted for 3 full minutes. Director Vance, sitting in the front row, clapped proudly, a tear of genuine joy glinting in his eye. After the conference, I walked out of the auditorium into the bright, warm, spring air of the university campus. A young female surgeon, my chief resident at the National Command, walked beside me holding a tablet with our upcoming schedule. Dr. Hayes, the ministry has requested our team to lead the International Medical Relief Mission to the Southern Pacific next month, she said, her eyes shining with excitement. Are we taking the assignment? I stopped beneath the blooming cherry blossom trees near the library, the same library where I had once spent my youth dreaming of becoming a doctor. I took a deep breath of the fresh, sweet spring air. My hand was strong. My mind was at peace. My life was entirely my own. Yes, I smiled, looking up at the clear blue sky stretching out to the horizon. Tell them we'll be ready,